Okay, so I'm going to go through what a mock meeting would look like just for the purpose of the presentation of the FBA and the behavior intervention plan. So I have um, edited this meeting agenda. This is the same one that I posted on week 14, just the template that you can use. Again, you can use any type of template. Also, I've added some notes here to help you so that you can go back and review this. I would not recommend putting these notes here for other participants of the meeting. If you want to have notes for yourself, that's fine, but I would leave blank for the other members of the meeting so that they can put their notes in. So, anyways, here is what my agenda looks like. I have allowed a spot for introductions. Purpose of the meeting is what we'll go over. Second, sharing concerns. So, when we share concerns, it's always good to start with a positive. Again, you're bringing parents in and talking to them about their child's behavior, sometimes for the first time, and it's tough to hear as a parent. So, we always want to start out with something positive, even if even if you really have to reach and say, I've really enjoyed getting to know them, or we've had a great start to the year, whatever that may be. But start off with a positive. We'll go into our FBA behavior description, where we talk about our behavior of concern, student strengths, and the descriptive summary. Then we'll talk about the student skills, so what skill deficits they display and when they display appropriate skills. Next, into the problem analysis, and this is the specific information we'll cover there, the problem analysis information, expected performance baseline, and the discrepancy data. And then finally, for the FBA, the environmental conditions and function. So we'll talk about antecedents, responses, and function of behavior. From there, we'll go into the behavior intervention plan. Notice that I've put here that this is the presentation of the proposed plan. So I always try and make sure that I use that word proposed or draft so that all team members understand that this document here is just a draft plan and that we'll be collecting input from the team members. So we'll just restate the behavior of concern, review that, talk about the replacement behaviors observed and reinforcement. We'll go into the goals, talking about just reviewing that baseline and then going into the goals that we've proposed for that. The implementation plan as far as prevention strategies, teaching replacement behavior and response strategies. After that, we would go into the safety plan if we had one for our student. I realize you all do not, but that would be a good place to put that. Then we'll talk about the monitoring. And finally, any additional concerns, just address any additional input from the team. If it's determined that this is a student that you'll be meeting on frequently, setting that next meeting, closing, thanking everyone for coming and ending on a positive note. So that is going to be kind of the agenda structure that I follow as I walk through this process. I will be referring back to this in the video. Again, keep in mind that I'm adding in some additional talking points and notes as I'm sharing this with you so that you can hear kind of my think aloud process that I go through as I present this information to a team. So with that, I will go ahead and jump back over to my screen and we'll look at our functional behavior analysis. Oh, another thing I wanted to bring up really quick, if you were if you were doing an entire IEP meeting where you were including an FBA and a BIP presentation within that, you don't necessarily need to break this down. You could just add the functional behavior analysis and the behavior intervention plan as just two steps in the IEP meeting agenda. You wouldn't need to necessarily break that out. But since we're only discussing those two things, I did break them out, and just so you can get a feel for the flow of the process. Okay, let's jump over to the FBA. So I'm going to go ahead and begin my meeting. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming today. My name is Melissa Mosier. I am the case manager for Tommy and for other special ed students in this building. If everyone can just go around the table and introduce yourself, that would be great. Okay, so we get through introductions. So we're here today to discuss the findings of the functional behavior analysis that was performed in response to some of the concerning behavior that we've seen here at school. I will say some things that I've just noted about Tommy in our time spent together. He's a great student. He's really smart. We know that he takes pride in things that he does and feels success when he does well. He's just been a really fun kid to get to know. So, in going through this process, I've really enjoyed getting to know Tommy. We're going to go ahead. This functional behavior analysis again was completed due to the concern that we've discussed previously with Tommy's behavior at school. And this functional behavior analysis is really just a culmination of all the data and observations and kind of everything that the school team, as well as the input that we've gathered from you, mom and dad at home. Thank you for being an active part of this team. But it's kind of a culmination of all of that information. This is the data and the information that we've used to create the proposed behavior intervention plan that I'll show you after we go through this. So first, as a team, we've identified behaviors of concern. Now, I know this looks lengthy, but we want to make sure when we're describing behavior of concern that we show any and all behaviors that Tommy may display. Does not mean that he's doing all of these things at the same time. Doesn't mean that he's doing all of these things every day, but these are behaviors that have come up. I'll go ahead and read this. Tommy displays poor self-regulation skills. When Tommy is given an academic task on his computer, he often wanders off of the assignment and plays games instead. When Tommy is confronted by the teacher, he will grunt or growl at the teacher, slam his computer screen down, throw his computer, leave his work area or classroom, hide in the cubby of his desk or his locker, scream at the teacher things like, I'm not doing it, in reference to his work, leave me alone, things like that. When Tommy's given work to do on paper, due to not being able to be successful with the computer, there's been times we've had to remove that if he's not using computer appropriately. He will crumple up his paper, sit with his work in front of him for extended periods of time without working on it, and says things like, it's too hard for me to think, or this is too much work. Tommy consistently has late work and fails to turn in most of the work assigned during the school week. He also struggles with executive functioning skills of organization and time management. He often forgets to bring necessary materials to class and loses his materials. His work is often scattered inside his backpack and not on his work clipboard, which he's supposed to keep all of his uncompleted work on. Tommy does not use his time wisely in class when given work time to complete tasks. He does work at a much slower pace than his peers and will sit for long periods of time without completing any work during independent time. He often does not follow along with the teacher during guided instruction. So those are just the behaviors. Again, we don't see these things all simultaneously. Some stand out more than others. But when we have to create a list of concerning behaviors, these are the things that we've identified as a team. Okay, we know Tommy has multiple strengths. We've identified those here in the FBA. We know that Tommy's an extremely bright student who received all of his education, all those core classes, the reading, the math, the written language in that ELP classroom for students who are of an advanced level. We know that Tommy has an extensive vocabulary. He's able to recognize and describe his emotions thoroughly. Um, I always enjoy listening to Tommy tell me how he's feeling because he will go into great detail. Another thing that we know is that he recognizes the feeling of success when he's able to complete his work on time and accomplish goals. And that's something that I hear Tommy verbalize when he is at the end of an assignment and he finishes his last problem. A lot of times he'll stretch his arms up and go, yes, I got it done. Um, so it's just neat to see that he is motivated by those intrinsic motivators of just feeling success. So we started the data collection process and we collected several pieces of data to kind of help us try and determine what the function of Tommy's behavior is, as well as kind of where he was performing in comparison to his peers. So This next box here describes, um, it's just a summary of that data that was collected. So one of the first things we did is we completed what's called the Functional Assessment Screening Tool, or the FAST assessment. This tool is given to help us try and identify what the function of Tommy's behavior was. So Mrs. Vanderschaff completed the FAST screener. I also completed one myself. Um, we both came up with the exact same findings, actually. The screener showed us that Tommy's primary function of behavior was to escape or avoid tasks, with a secondary reinforcer of accessing preferred items. Now we know for Tommy that that preferred item would be computer. So what we're seeing is a lot of the behaviors that he's engaging in are for those two reasons: to try and get out of doing work or escape doing work, and to try and access computer. The next thing we did is I went into the classroom and I observed Tommy using an ABC analysis form. So when we do ABC analysis, we're looking for behavior to occur, but more specifically, we're looking for common antecedents and common responses to that behavior to try and see if we can find some trends. So common antecedents that we found were, and we talk about antecedents as triggers, I should point that out. So common triggers that we found were when Tommy's put on the clock or given a time limit, um, when the teacher has to redirect him, when he's presented with a work task, especially one where writing is involved, or especially one that he is just not really that interested in. His common response to these antecedents um, that were observed were the growling or grunting at the teacher, saying things like, "I can't think," after several minutes of sitting, refusing to begin his work, running from the classroom. It was noted that during one observation period, Tommy did not show up for his science class. And Mom, that's you and I had communication about that previously, so I know you're aware of the situation. But teachers went to look for him. When we went to look for him, we found him hiding in the locker area playing his computer games. He had missed 15 minutes of class already at that point. When he was confronted, he slammed his computer, threw it on the floor, screaming, covering his ears. He just really did not want to hear anything we had to say at his point. At that point, he knew that he had been caught doing what he wasn't supposed to be doing, and we just saw that frustration really build with him. So, in order to get a good idea of where Tommy was functioning at currently, his current level of performance, we were trying to find the best way to collect data. And when we looked at some of when we took those behaviors of concern and kind of um, put them into main ideas, if you will, the things that we really looked at that were a main focus of concern would be Tommy's work completion, and we measured that in how many assignments he was able to turn in out of how many assignments were assigned in a week-long time frame. His emotional regulation skills. There we were looking specifically at the incidents of screaming, the work refusal, leaving his work area, crumpling up papers, ripping up papers, those types of things. Materials and organization. So is he bringing his materials to class? Is he keeping materials and work organized? And then finally, that time management piece. So when Tommy's giving work time, is he using work to do work? Is he completing that work in a reasonable amount of time? So we collected that data over a baseline period, and this is what we found. Um, when we created this data sheet, we were looking at how often Tommy is able to do these things independently, how often he is doing them guided, meaning the teacher has to give roughly 2 prompts, and how often he is doing them completely with more like one-on-one attention from the teacher, where he's not able to do them at all. So what we found was that his work completion in that area, the work completion by week, we saw that move from 33%, 18% to 36% for that median score of 33% of all assignments given over time. And again, this was over a 3-week data collection period for the purpose of gaining a baseline. Emotional regulation skills, again, looking at the times where he was responding appropriately to stressors and not doing things like screaming, running from the classroom, work refusal. So we saw that at 100% the first week, which is great. Second week, 60%. Third week, 64% for that median score of 64% of being able to exhibit emotional regulation skills during academic times. The materials and organization by week. Um, and the time management, we looked at those both on that scaled level. So, how often is he able to do them independently? How often is he able to do them with prompts? And how often is he able to complete them guided, which means more than three prompts or requires one on one attention from an adult or just isn't completing them at all? So, in the area of materials and organization, Tommy was able to organize his materials independently 75% of the time, 70% of the time, and 100% of the time for that median score of 70%. And then you can see here that the amount of time that he needed prompting or guidance was very minimal. So this is good. This led us to believe that materials and organization really weren't a piece that we needed to follow. Although Tommy's organization looks very different than how other students may organize or how we as adults may organize their work, Tommy knows where things are at. Um, him and I even had a discussion one day about, sometimes your backpack kind of looks like organized chaos, but you always know where things are at. So as long as he can find his materials, that's really what we're looking for. And he was able to do that most of the time independently. The time management piece. So again, is he working during work time? And is he taking a reasonable amount of time to do his work? So what we were looking for there, again, we scaled those down. He was completing that process independently 75% of the, oops, I'm sorry, wrong line, 83% of the time, 35% of the time, and 21% of the time for that median score of 35%. So obviously a much lower score here in the time management on the independent level. With prompts, we can see the data here. So that was a median score of 8%. And then in the guided range where he required more than three prompts, he was in that 25% range. So kind of a good split between independent and prompting, but we still want to try and build upon this and get his skills a little stronger. So that's where the data really was pulled from. When we talk about those things in relation to how they affect Tommy's progress and the skills that he is lacking that are really what it's doing is it's causing some difficulties in the classroom. So some of the skills that we've identified that are causing Tommy struggles are the fact that he does lack the ability to regulate his emotions when he's upset. When he is calm, um, he's able to talk through what that would look like, how he should regulate, how he can maintain calm. But in the moment, he's unable to do that. He can identify his emotions when he's upset, but he's not able to choose an appropriate coping skill instead of the screaming, the running, the hiding. Tommy also lacks age appropriate time management skills. So it's difficult for him to prioritize work. We see him get overwhelmed when he has a lot of work to catch up on, and we know that this is a stressor for him. He also he struggles to verbalize the need for a change in his work. Some of this has to do with his speech, and we know that that can also be a point of frustration for him. But we really want to get him to the point where he's able to ask for a change in his work, maybe in the order he does it, where he's able to verbalize his preferences and advocate for his preferences, ask for help. So, some of these things that would just cause that frustration level to decrease. That also would include using an appropriate volume and tone when making requests. Before we get into the appropriate skills that we see him display, do we have any questions at this point? Anything that I need to clarify? Okay, if not, let's talk about all of the appropriate skills that we see him demonstrate because Tommy does have some good He does have some great skills that he's able to show us. We know that he can identify and verbalize his emotions. We know, again, that once he's calm, he's able to focus on a task, and he's able to get some more work done. Sometimes it feels like he almost has to have that explosion, and has to kind of have that outburst before he's able to fully come down from that and neutralize and be able to get back to his work. When Tommy's work is of a preferred subject or topic of interest, he's more likely to attend to his work and comply with work demands. So we've seen that work to our benefit. And at times, he's able to attend to a task and use his work time to work. We know that these things are more likely to be observed when technology is involved, and when the teacher is attending to him and prompting him through his work. So that's kind of the tricky part there. We know he's more motivated and more engaged when he is able to use technology. However, unless a teacher can be right there present with him, making sure that he's doing what he's supposed to be doing on the computer, sometimes he can wander from the assignment given. So we've really talked through most of this as far as, what about the behavior is concerning. Again, we're looking at how this affects Tommy in the classroom. His emotional regulation skills do cause disruption in the classroom. It causes the teacher to have to stop and tend to Tommy's behavior. She spends a lot of her time prompting Tommy to work. Because of this, he's missed out on instruction time, just due to his own outbursts. He's even attempted to skip class, like the day he was found in the locker room playing computer games. So, um, we also worry about property damage. He slammed his computer screen down, thrown his computer. Luckily, nothing has been broken yet. But we don't want to have to send home a bill for a computer. And, we know that Tommy, more than anything, would feel really, really bad about that. His grades are suffering just because we don't have the input to put in as he's not completing work. Because he's constantly behind on his work, he's missing out on valuable instruction time when he's having to stay out of class to make up some of that work. So it's kind of a trickle effect that's affecting him in the classroom. As you can see at that point, I just kind of summarize that information because we've already talked about it in other places. When I go to the expected or desired performance here, this is where I'm going to want to stick a little more to the script. Okay. So we've talked about what is concerning about Tommy's behavior. We also take this information and we compare it to peers. So the next thing we look at is what is the expected or desired performance of Tommy's peers? What Tommy and his peers? What do we want a typical student his age doing? And what we used for this is we used peer comparison data. We used school norms. We have our PBIS, our positive behavior interventions and support system. Um, Based on that, students are expected to demonstrate emotional regulation without incidents of screaming, running from the classroom, and or hiding from the teacher, throwing items, or grunting or growling 100% of the time. Now, that doesn't mean that students always self-regulate and that students don't get upset. They do, but it's these incidents of screaming, running from the classroom, hiding, throwing items, that look different than peers. Typical fifth grade students are able to manage their emotions and demonstrate emotional regulation 100% of the time. Typical fifth grade students turn in 90% of their work on time within a school week. It's expected that fifth grade students use work time to work and manage their time in an age appropriate manner, where time limits are set within the classroom by the teacher. So that is just what we would expect to see. So taking that information that we took above from the data collection, Tommy's current level of performance. Currently, when presented with a work task, Tommy will demonstrate emotional regulation skills. So, where he's asking for a short break when needed, saying okay and starting on his work, refraining from screaming, grunting, growling, or refusal, not leaving his assigned work area, throwing materials on an average of 64% of the time. So obviously that's an area where we'd like to see him increase the amount of time where he's able to show those emotional regulation skills. And then when presented with a work task and setting a reasonable time frame with the teacher's help, Tommy will use his time effectively to work and complete assignments on time, an average of 33% of all given assignments. So that's where he's currently operating, is at 33%. When we compare that to the students' performance and look at the discrepancy, since students are able to emotionally regulate themselves without those incidents of the behaviors listed above, the discrepancy between Tommy and his peers is 36%, just the difference of that 100% and his 64% baseline. And then when we look at his work completion, students, typical students are completing their work 90% of the time. Tommy's was 33 for a discrepancy of 57%. So we talked about common antecedents up above. We just list them out here again so we have a really good set of antecedents. So we are able to identify what kinds of triggers might cause Tommy to have or to show behaviors. So we talked about these before. I'll just briefly go over them again. Work tasks, not getting computer, not, being asked to write, being put on a time frame around the clock, prompts from his teacher, getting caught using his computer for activities other than work time. Common responses from the teacher. When Tommy becomes upset, grunts, growls, screams, yells at the teacher, I'm trying to think, runs from the class, hides, those behaviors we've identified already. The teacher begins with a verbal prompt restating the expectation, reminding Tommy of appropriate behavior. If Tommy leaves the classroom, the teacher will follow him to assure he is in a safe place, and the office is called to come and remove him from the pod or locker area. Now, when I say remove him, that means just say we're going to the office. We have never had an issue where he has not come with whatever staff has asked him to go with them. When Tommy is not working, the teacher will prompt him using a verbal prompt to return to the given task. A gestural prompt is sometimes used to point to the assignment or tap on the side of his desk to get him back on task. When Tommy still refuses to get started to work, the teacher will give Tommy 3 sticky notes on the side of his desk. So we put those on his desk. This is again after he's refusing to work, after just some general prompting. A verbal prompt to begin working is given and 1 minute wait time. Every minute that passes where Tommy still hasn't started on his work, the teacher will take a sticky note, and that process will repeat itself until all sticky notes are gone. When they're all gone, then that's when Tommy has to go to the office to complete his work. So that is kind of how the teacher responds, how peers respond to Tommy's behavior. For the most part, his peers have learned to ignore it. Occasionally, when he gets really disruptive, when the screaming gets loud or whatever, students will look at Tommy just naturally as you would look at anything that makes a loud noise, anyone or anything, but they don't interact with him when he has escalated. So again, all of this information has led us to believe that the primary function or the main reason that Tommy is behaving the way he is behaving is to escape or avoid work tasks. The secondary function would be to gain access to the preferred items, which in this case would be computer and even more specific for games. Okay, so we've gotten through the FBA. Woohoo! Let's look at our agenda again. The next step is we're going to talk about that proposed plan for the behavior intervention plan. Now, there are a lot of boxes here that we can just restate and quickly review because a lot of this information, as we know, carries directly over from the FBA. So I can restate a lot of these things, such as the behavior of concern, and I can restate it in far less words. The replacement behavior that's observed. I do want to talk specifically about reinforcement because we haven't really touched on that piece yet. We'll review the baseline data and the goals. And then we'll start to talk about the strategies, and that's where we'll want to get more specific. I did forget as I was going through this, just because I don't have my graphs on here, that when we talk about that baseline data on the FBA, that is where, I'll highlight it here quick, that is where you will want to make sure that you show your graphs there. So as we're talking through the baseline, you can show them that as well. Okay, jump back over to my meeting. All right, so that concludes all of the information from our functional behavior analysis. Any questions on that? Anything that I could go back and provide any more clarification on? Or is there anything that we wanted to review before I get to the proposed behavior intervention plan? Okay, if not, we'll jump over to the proposed behavior intervention plan. So this is just a drafted copy that I have made based on the information that we've gathered and based on some of the strategies that we have used with Tommy. A lot of the information you'll see on this behavior plan is information that comes directly from the functional behavior analysis. So to honor everyone's time, I will paraphrase some of this. If at any time we want to stop and talk through any of the things that you feel like I've gone too quickly over, please stop me and let me know, and we'll go back and review that together as a team. So the behaviors of concern here we've identified um, in the functional behavior analysis. These are the exact same behaviors that we identified before. So the poor regulation skills, having a hard time staying where he's assigned to be on the computer, the behaviors that we see, the grunting, the growling, slamming the computer, yelling, the executive functioning skills of organization and time management, work completion. Do we need to review those any further? Okay, so next in the process, we have to identify if Tommy's behavior is a behavior concern of a skill deficit or a performance deficit. We've identified that there is a performance deficit here. Um, we have been able to see him show or display the appropriate behavior at times, and we talked about these a little bit on the FBA too, so we'll review here. We know he's able to identify and verbalize his emotions. We know that once he calms down, he's more likely to focus on a work task. We know that he prefers when he has an assignment that is of a preferred subject or topic of interest, he's more likely to attend. And at times he's able to use his work time to work. We know that this happens more when he has technology if a teacher can be with him to help make sure that he's staying on task. Are there any other times where we've observed this replacement behavior? Okay, so part of the behavior intervention plan is that we try and establish a reinforcement that will be motivating for the student to try and pull some of that more appropriate behavior out. So we know that Tommy's very motivated by computer, and we are able to see the appropriate behavior be elicited by offering him computer. So we know that Tommy is more likely to comply with work when he's able to earn computer time for completing his work. However, we do note that it is difficult for him to transition off the computer when it's time. So that's a skill we're still working on. But as we were developing an intervention for Tommy, computers stuck out to us right away as we know it's a preferred item. Typically, we use preferred items for reinforcements so that it's motivating for students, and we did start to see an increase in his ability to comply with work when computer was offered as a reward. Okay. Is there anything else that's motivating for him at home, mom or dad, or computer really has what is what we've been found that's useful in school, but anything else that you've seen motivate him at home? Okay, so next we'll talk about again what his current performance is, and then how we can build upon that performance and where we want to see Tommy get. So we've got our baseline data here again, or the current level of performance. So again, when presented with a work task, Tommy will demonstrate emotional regulation skills, asking for a short break if needed, saying okay and starting on his work, refraining from screaming, grunting, growling, refusing to work, or leaving his assigned area, throwing materials. We're seeing those emotional regulation skills on an average of 64% of academic time. And then that second baseline that we collected, would be the work task. So when presented with a work task and setting a reasonable time frame with the teacher's help, Tommy will use his Tommy uses his time effectively to work and complete the assignment on an average of 33% of all given assignments. Okay, so keeping in mind that we looked at that peer comparison data, where do we want Tommy to get to so that we can start to close that gap? So what we've done here is I've got some proposed goals. Again, thinking about where Tommy's currently functioning, where his peers are functioning, and how we can get him or where we want to get him more appropriately, where we want to get him to be able to close the gap between him and his peers. So currently he's displaying those emotional regulation skills 64% of the time. I'm proposing that we set the goal for Tommy to be able to show those skills 90% of the time. We're asking, or we've identified that his peers complete them 100% of the time. And while we don't want to set a goal that is unreasonable for Tommy, we also want to make sure that we set a goal that's challenging. And really, 90% of the time is where I can feel good to know that most of the time Tommy's getting what he needs out of the classroom. And we want to be able to continue or to see him continue that behavior over 9 consecutive weeks. That would tell me if he's able to do that for an entire quarter straight and every week his average comes out to 90%, that he's really got a good handle on that skill and we can start to fine tune something else. So, how does that sound for a goal? Does that sound reasonable to the team? Do we feel that that is a challenging yet attainable goal for Tommy? Okay, good. I think it will help us close that gap. And that's really, again, where I feel really good that if he can achieve that 90% of the time, then he's really getting the most out of his educational day. So, the second goal to go along with that work completion piece in 36 weeks, so in an academic school year, when presented with a work task and setting a reasonable time frame with the teacher's help, Tommy will use his time effectively to work and complete the assignment on an average of 65% of the time for 8 out of 9 weeks. Now he's currently operating at 33%. So again, we want to set a goal that's attainable yet challenging for him. And I think 65% is a good starting point. And again, we'd want to see that for 8 out of 9 weeks. We know that that band and choir. I contemplated setting this a little bit higher, proposing that we set it a little higher. But with band and choir not having that study hall time, I want it to be reasonable as well. So how do we feel about that 65% and giving him the 8 out of 9 week trial period to complete that? Do we feel that that's an achievable goal for Tommy, yet challenging? Okay. So we've identified Tommy's goals. Now we need to identify what we are going to do and what strategies and supports we can put in place to help Tommy achieve those goals. So the first thing that we did is we came up with a list of all of the prevention strategies that we are currently using and that we used in the intervention period that we know work well with Tommy. As I go through these, if you think of anything else that you're doing in your classrooms, things that work at home, please offer that information up and we can talk about adding it to the list. Again, these are just things that we've used in the intervention process that we've seen work well. So prevention strategies, a visual schedule in his planner, a checklist provided of work to do, time with the teacher when each task is presented to set a reasonable time frame of assignments given, use of a break card, which allows Tommy to take 3 minutes away from a task and collect his thoughts with an individual timer. I'm not going to read through all of the rest of these, but I would read through these specifically, okay, to make sure that we cover all of those prevention strategies. At the end of that, I would ask, does that sound like a good comprehensive list? Is there anything else that you see as a good prevention strategy to help prevent some of these behaviors that we've seen? Okay, the next thing we need to identify then is what skills Tommy will be taught to help him reach his goal, and then how we will teach those skills. So again, these were identified in our intervention process, and Again, feel free to provide input on any other skills that you think would be important for Tommy to learn. So the skills that we identified were emotional regulation skills with an emphasis in using different coping strategies or tools when feeling different emotions. The use of a break card for Tommy to use when he needs a short timeout from work tasks. Again, that's a short timeout. It's not escape from work. He can take a quick brain break and then come back. Prioritizing work using a checklist and work due dates. And again, I'm not going to read through all of these, but you would read through them so that we get through the entire list. And we've identified that these skills are best taught to Tommy in a small group setting, 30 minutes daily, with an emphasis in the skills identified above. One-on-one instruction would be provided as needed as situations occur throughout the school day to help reinforce the taught skills, and skills be taught in an explicit or direct instruction model with opportunities for modeling, practice, role playing, um, different situations that may mirror situations that come across in his day. So, is there anything else we feel we need to add to this list as a team? Any other skills that you would like to see him work on? Okay, finally, the response strategies. So, these are just strategies that we've identified work well in responding to Tommy's behavior. Again, please feel free to offer input as I go through this list. When Tommy is refusing to work, grunting or growling at the teacher, saying no, etc., a visual or gestural prompt will be used to redirect Tommy to the assigned task. Again, I would go through this entire list and at the end, ask for input again. So, is there anything else, teachers or mom and dad, that you've seen as successful response strategies? If someone offered, we could talk through that, see if it's already noted in the IEP somewhere, if it looks similar. If not, we move on. Okay, in this case, Tommy has a safety plan. So I am going to talk about that. You will not. So you can just say at that point, um, that since safety is not a concern for Alex or Veronica, we don't need to address a safety plan and we can talk about how we'll monitor the plan. You could just skip right into that part. If I were addressing the safety plan, I would say, since we have had some small safety concerns of Tommy leaving the classroom, um, if he does leave the classroom, we have identified that when he leaves the classroom and the teacher's not able to track him because, maybe she can't leave the students that she's with, the office will be called to help locate him and get him back to class safely, or down to the office to call him if he's not ready to return to class. So, just kind of a safety net there to help with that. Are there any questions or do we have any feedback on the safety plan? If not, we'll move on to the monitoring plan. So here we're just identifying how the plan itself will be monitored. So we will be monitoring the student goal that we've identified above by using that daily recording sheet that we talked about and monitoring his emotional regulation and work completion or time management. The percentage of those weekly totals will be recorded on the IEP. So that is how we will monitor that plan. Notice I didn't really go over the frequency of monitoring or the person responsible for monitoring. Since I talked about up here that it was a daily behavior chart, I really don't need to restate that. Okay, how will we know that Tommy is making some growth towards his replacement behavior? So here, since he's going to be involved in daily social skills instruction, that will be monitored when he's in a small group with me. His progress in the above skills will be documented in his chart. Anytime we would have to use that individual instruction piece, so we would know what skills we need to work on in that small group. And again, that's something we would do daily during social skills instruction. And then this plan will be reviewed at least once a year or sooner if changes in the plan arise. So, some possibilities that we would need to meet again is if Tommy meets his goals quicker than expected, and we need to meet again to determine what our next steps are. If things are not working well, Tommy has a medication change and we need to kind of revise some things, we could meet again, but we will revise this plan at least once every year. And we will do that as an IEP team. That completes all of the information here on the behavior intervention plan. Is there anything else, any other input from the team that we would like to add to the plan? Okay, if not, then what I would like to do is just go back to any concerns that we have after hearing the data from the functional behavior analysis, after going through the proposed behavior intervention plan. Anything else that the team would like to add? Okay, if not, then that will conclude our meeting. I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank you all for being on what I like to call Team Tommy. We're all in this together. We're all working to support this great kiddo who really wants to be successful, and we know can see that intrinsic motivation of feeling good about having his work completed and doing the right things. We just want to help him be the best Tommy that he can be. So I appreciate everybody working together, coming together in support of this kid. Okay, and that is a brief ending or closing to the meeting. Um, I think that pretty much concludes what you will do. Again, mine was long because I'm stopping and I'm explaining. Also, my behavior plan is a lot more intense than yours is, so you won't have as much information to go through. What I'm looking for, remember, what I'm really looking for as you're presenting is that you are able to talk somewhat freely about the information. You've prepared yourself, you're stopping and you're asking the team for input, you're covering the information, and you're using that good combination of academic language and parent friendly language. Hopefully, you noticed that I restated several things. I might have given the technical term for it, but then explained what that was or described, more in detail how we collected data or whatever. So, hopefully, this was helpful to you. If you have any questions at all, please do not hesitate to get a hold of me and I will help answer those.